There is a war coming that will involve every single nation on Earth. Not a local conflict, not a regional border war, not a proxy fight hidden behind diplomacy and headlines. A real global confrontation. Every army, every government, every military force, every alliance moving toward one final place. And the most unsettling part is this. Scripture described the pattern long before the modern world existed. Long before nations were connected the way they are now. Long before global media, instant communication, satellite surveillance, drones, cyber warfare, and the speed of modern military movement. You have heard the word before. You have seen it in movies. You have heard it used in sermons, in documentaries, in casual conversation, and probably without fully thinking about what it means. The word is Armageddon. For many people, it sounds like a dramatic religious metaphor, a word for chaos, a word for disaster, a word people use when they want to describe the end of the world in a broad, vague way. But Scripture uses it with far more precision than most people realize. And once you understand the place, the geography, the direction, and the buildup, the word stops sounding symbolic and starts sounding terrifyingly real. The word appears only once in the Bible, in Revelation 16:16. And they gathered them together to the place called Armageddon. That is the verse. One verse. One word. And yet that one word carries the weight of the final confrontation of human history. So what does it actually mean? The word Armageddon comes from ancient Hebrew roots. Har means mountain or hill. Megiddo is the name of an ancient city in northern Israel. Put together, Armageddon means the hill or mountain of Megiddo. This is not imaginary language. It is a real place. Megiddo sits above a wide open region known as the Jezreel Valley. This valley is one of the largest flat battlefields in the entire Middle East. It stretches wide enough to host enormous armies and broad enough to become a natural stage for large-scale conflict. In other words, the geography itself seems to invite warfare, and history confirms it. This valley has seen invasion after invasion, battle after battle, empire after empire. Thutmose III fought here. Deborah and Barak fought here. Gideon fought here. King Josiah died here. Napoleon stood in this valley and reportedly called it the most natural battlefield on Earth. That phrase matters because a man from modern military history looked out over this valley and recognized what ancient scripture had already pointed toward centuries earlier. This is a place made for conflict, not because it was designed by man for evil, but because its geography makes it a strategic gathering place. That is why Armageddon is not just a word. It is a location. It is a convergence point. It is where the final global conflict is said to gather. But to understand Armageddon, you cannot start with the valley alone. You have to understand the road that leads there. Scripture does not describe this final war as something that appears out of nowhere. It develops. It escalates. It gathers force over time. There is a sequence. There is movement. There is tension building from multiple directions. And when you step back and look at the prophetic language, you see a pattern that is remarkable because it is not random. It is directional. It is geographical. It is cumulative. From the north, from the south, from the east, from the west. Different forces moving, aligning, and converging toward one region in Israel. Now, the question is not simply whether a final confrontation exists in prophecy. The question is how the pieces come together. And to answer that, people often turn to Daniel and Revelation. Daniel speaks of kingdoms, kings, empires, and a final conflict. Revelation speaks of gathered nations, a great confrontation, and a world drawn into a decisive moment. The details are not all the same in every passage, but the themes are consistent. Power gathers, human ambition rises, fear spreads, alliances form, and eventually the nations are pulled toward the same place. Megiddo. Now stop for a moment and consider how different this is from the way wars used to work. For most of history, major armies were limited by distance. Transportation was slow, communication was incomplete, coordination across continents was difficult. A truly global military convergence would have been nearly impossible. But today the world is connected in ways ancient people could never have imagined. Military technology moves quickly. Intelligence moves instantly. Weapons can cross oceans. Political decisions ripple across continents. A regional conflict can become a world crisis in a matter of days. That is why people look at the modern world and feel uneasy. Because the machinery of convergence is no longer theoretical. It is possible. And if Scripture is read in that light, Armageddon is not just a word from the past. It becomes a future point of convergence that appears increasingly understandable in the present. But what exactly is gathering there? That is where the biblical language becomes even more intense. Different passages describe forces from different directions. A northern power, a southern coalition, eastern kings, western structures of power. Each described in the language of prophecy, each tied to a larger unfolding of history. Some people interpret these passages very literally. Others interpret them symbolically. Others see them as layered language about recurring patterns in world history. But even when people disagree on interpretation, they usually agree on one thing. The direction of the text is toward a final confrontation that is bigger than one nation, bigger than one army, and bigger than ordinary politics. This is not just a war between governments. It is a collision of systems. It is power against power. It is pride against accountability. It is human control reaching its limit. And that is what makes it so serious. Because Scripture does not portray this as a conflict that human beings can simply negotiate away at the last second. It portrays a gathering that is allowed to happen, a convergence that becomes unavoidable, a moment when the world's powers are all in one place and none of them can stop what comes next. The language of Armageddon forces one central realization. Human history is not self-contained. There is more happening than what the eye can see. Now, when people hear this kind of language, some become fascinated by maps, alliances, military hardware, and modern politics. Others become frightened. Others become skeptical. But underneath all of it lies a deeper question. Why does this old prophetic language continue to matter? Because it speaks to something human beings cannot avoid: the question of finality. What happens when the world cannot keep balancing itself forever? What happens when power becomes too unstable? What happens when fear outgrows wisdom? What happens when the systems people trust begin to fail them? Armageddon, in the prophetic imagination, is the answer to those questions. It is the moment when the world's self-confidence reaches its breaking point. It is the moment when humanity gathers its strength and still cannot save itself. It is the moment when the final truth is revealed. Human power is real, but it is not ultimate. That is why this subject has haunted people for centuries. Not just because it is dramatic, but because it exposes something deeper about the human condition. We are always building, always expanding, always organizing, always assuming that more power will mean more control. And yet Scripture says there comes a moment when the whole structure of human confidence stands exposed. That is Armageddon, the place where the nations gather and the illusion of control collapses. Now think carefully about the geography again. Megiddo is not hidden in the middle of nowhere. It is not a secret cave. It is not some impossible fantasy location. It is a very real place with historical significance, visible on modern maps. The valley opens wide. The terrain invites movement. The region is strategically located, and that is part of why it has mattered for so long. But the prophetic weight of the valley is not only in its geography, it is also in its symbolism. A battlefield that has seen so much human conflict becomes, in the prophetic imagination, the stage for the final one. That is why this subject has such force. It combines history, place, and destiny into one scene. And when people talk about Armageddon today, they are often speaking about the end result, not the process. But the process matters. Scripture repeatedly emphasizes that the final confrontation does not happen because one side simply decides to fight. It happens through a buildup of international tension, moral deterioration, spiritual blindness, and the widening gap between human power and divine purpose. In other words, the war is not just military, it is spiritual, it is moral, it is historical. It is the result of a world that keeps moving away from truth until truth no longer feels optional. And then comes the convergence. Different regions, different coalitions, different ambitions, all moving toward the same place. The North moves, the South moves, the East moves, the West moves, and all of it gathers in the land of Israel at the place called Armageddon. Now this is the point where many people ask, is this only symbolic language, or is it a literal future event? And that question matters, because some readers see Armageddon as a picture of recurring conflict throughout history. Others see it as a final literal event. Others see both, a symbolic pattern that reaches its fullest expression at the end. But even if someone prefers a symbolic reading, the warning remains. The text is still saying something enormous about the future of human arrogance and the limits of military power. That is why the message cannot be dismissed. The world may not be at the final moment yet, but the world certainly knows what it feels like to move toward crises bigger than any one government can solve. You can see the pressure. You can see the alliances. You can see the fear. You can see the instability. You can see how quickly conflict spreads. And if you understand prophecy even a little, you realize that what matters most is not just the names of the nations, but the pattern of the age. Human beings build power structures. Those power structures collide. The collisions intensify, and the stage becomes set for the great gathering. Armageddon, then, is not just about destruction. It is also about revelation. It reveals what happens when the nations of the world gather in confidence and discover they are not ultimate. It reveals the difference between human control and divine judgment. It reveals that history is not drifting without direction. It reveals that there is a final moment when the world is confronted by something greater than itself. And that is why the Bible presents this event with such force. Not to entertain curiosity, not to encourage speculation, but to sober the mind, to wake people up, to remind them that the world is not endlessly stable. So when people throw around the word Armageddon casually, they usually do not realize they are speaking about a reality meant to produce reflection, not just excitement. It is one thing to hear the word in a movie trailer. It is another thing to realize it points to a place, a future convergence, and a final accountability. And that is what makes this subject so powerful. Because underneath the talk of armies and nations, the deeper question is personal. If the world is moving toward a moment where truth becomes unavoidable, then what does that mean for you now? If history has a direction, then where are you headed in it? If there is a final confrontation between human pride and divine authority, then how should a person live today? Those are the questions Armageddon forces us to ask. Not just, what will happen? But, what should I do in the meantime? That is the real purpose of prophetic warning. Not panic, not obsession, not speculation for its own sake, but preparation, reflection, clarity, and humility. Because the greatest mistake people make when hearing about the end is to treat it like entertainment. But Scripture treats it like a warning that the world's powers are temporary, a warning that human alliances are fragile, a warning that the things people trust most can fail them in a single moment, and a warning that the final stage of history belongs to the Creator, not to the nations. That is why Armageddon matters, not because it makes for dramatic conversation, but because it reminds us that every empire is temporary, every weapon is limited, and every human system eventually faces accountability. The nations may gather, the armies may assemble, the valley may fill, but the end is not decided by human strength. It is decided by the one who holds history itself. And if that is true, then the question is not only whether the world is moving toward that place. The question is whether you are moving with wisdom, whether you are living with awareness, whether you are paying attention to the signs of the times, not in a fearful way, but in a serious way. Because one day, the world will discover that history was never random. One day, the meaning of the gathering will become obvious. One day, every nation will see that human power has limits. And one day, the final outcome will be beyond the control of any army on earth. So remember the word, remember the place, remember the valley, remember Megiddo. Because Armageddon is more than a dramatic term from movies and headlines. It is a biblical warning that the nations of the world do not move forever without consequence. And whether someone reads that warning literally or symbolically, the message remains the same. Do not confuse temporary power with ultimate power. Do not confuse noise with control. Do not confuse military strength with lasting security. The world is moving. History is moving. And one day, the movement will reach its climax. The real question is not whether the valley exists. It does. The real question is whether we understand what it means when the world gathers there. And the answer, once understood, is enough to silence casual conversation forever.